Hey, and welcome to Star Wars Roleplay. I know it's been a while since I've done anything more live or, up front and personal or covered any stories. I just released a number of Star Wars Evolved audiobooks. I'm taking a little break from that so I can do some other content and prep some more audiobooks in the future. My previous page is locked down. If anybody that was following me there, or to anybody that's new, that hasn't seen my face, I did do some other live videos on Star Wars from a cultural perspective. I did some intro, and also we took a little look at the Star Wars Roleplay and Second Life, and I'm going to pick up a little bit where I left off a couple of years ago in terms of some of the stuff with Second Life. I'm just going to jump right into it. So, for those of you that were not with us last time, oh, I didn't mean to hit that page. Um, I accidentally clicked on something. I covered the birth of Star Wars roleplay and Second Life. I talked a bit about 2003 and some of the early things that were going on, and you know, I really just want to expand, I guess, and you understand where my inspiration for some of the ebooks and some of the audiobooks that I've come out with comes from. So if we go back to, the birth, you had a collective that was trying to put Star Wars content on. And I feel like on YouTube we've kind of got the same vision. And sure, there's still a lot of Star Wars roleplay in forums and, you know, small communities in other places. It's something that has faded a bit, but I think Star Wars fans will always be Star Wars fans. So if we jump into 2004, I'm not going to go back to 2003. You have the root of Star Wars roleplay that starts to develop, and you have the Jedi Temple group founded by Nikhil Rutherford. He's technically the first Jedi, but his group wasn't as organized as a lot of Jedi groups today, and Jedi training wasn't like what it was. Like when you first came on, you could just jump into a role, or have a couple weeks or a couple months of training, and you whip right through a story fast. But in the late eras of Star Wars, they slowed it down. And I'm not going to judge on either or, but I'm going to continue with the information. So, the first Galactic Empire group is founded by Mary Edison. There's another Galactic Empire founded by Jericho Martov. A lot of the first TIE fighters, lightsabers, stormtrooper outfits started to be created. Other Jedi groups slowly started to come on. I mean, Second Life first opened in 2003, as far as I know, and the way that they marketed the first couple years was as a game, not so much as a social platform. I mean, maybe some advertisements were tailored to the social platform, but the ones that I seen in my youth in 2006 where they portrayed it as a game, which is why a lot of players did jump on here in the early 2000s to 2010, and even during the COVID pandemic. So as we continue, we have Master Marcus's orders, one of the first that it points out, because it's the even though it wasn't the very first Jedi Order, it was the first that had sort of had a set of rules and wasn't as loose. Like these were serious role players that put a lot of time into Jedi content and how they were developing, how they thought a training should be for a Padawan or for a Sith acolyte. A lot of the early players I guess, the pioneers who first built and developed a lot of the roleplay norms, kind of came on in the early years, like 2004, 2003, 2005. That was before my time. The Jedi Order, founded by Greg Manhattan, Hunter Shaw, Marcus Moreau. See, they were a significant group. Mandalorians, founded by Dazzle Street, which is a name that, even later players know because she left a legacy. So, 2004. Let me just go right there because I wrote a book, Star Wars Evolved Episode 1, The Dark Spirit of Darth Vader. So in that audiobook, there's some influences. All of it's from Star Wars roleplay. It's just none of it is actually official history or anything of that means. I mean, yes, some of the events that I write about in some of my different books and offshoot books are some of them actually did happen and were role played out, but there's a lot of things that is story writing, so it's not my books are not official timeline, but a lot of the characters and a lot of the events and places and things, they're strongly influenced from actual people that I've met through the years, or characters, and they are influences from sims and locations that players had created or I have experienced on, whether it was Secondlife, Star Wars Roleplay, or Star Wars Galaxies Roleplay. There's a community on Gary Mod, as well as some Star Wars forums. I didn't really get it too heavily into the Gary Mod's roleplay. By the time I started checking it out, the community seemed to kind of decline, but I did know it was popular for a while. So let's continue on. I really don't want to jump into there until I explain everything. So I talked a little bit about the founding players. Well, the founding players, their goal was to create content, but they did do one roleplay, which is the influence behind the Dark Spirit of Darth Vader. So at that time, stormtrooper uniforms, there were new TIE fighters and all these things, and Coruscant was the ideal, but I think really players, they were building anything and everything, but Coruscant's where it all started. That's why you kind of see the center of the galaxy, a very center location in the story so far, and so many factions and players have built it or had their own creations. But yes, the first location is kind of Coruscant, and you draw upon what you know about players or locations and lore, and add these things as I'm bringing characters out, to know that some of these people, giving them a significant place based on the inspiration that I've had in writing. So when you look at the battle against Darth Vader, the stormtroopers and Darth Vader, that was the big thing in 2003 to create those items, and anybody with a blaster could have been a rebel back then. So to have the rebel players and then the first lightsabers coming out, so yeah, you have some of the early Jedi that are kind of making their way on the scene, and rebel soldiers, stormtroopers, Darth Vader. Although I brought it in more into the modern era, something that is, a little bit after the Star Wars Legends books, where the last ones stop, and more within the reasonable established timeline that the Star Wars roleplay community had spent the most time in. So that's kind of the inspiration of the first book. And then, the Mandalorians, they were a pretty big faction. So that's why Dazzle Street is a main character, one of the first main antagonists. Because besides the Dark Spirit of Darth Vader, the second Mandalorian Wars, that was a big thing, as Mandalorians were also starting to get established, and I merged the first Galactic Empire groups and players together to make it more sensible for a Star Wars story, and I used a lot of the early Jedi players, but I did create some unique characters that did not exist at all in Star Wars roleplay to help um, explain events and to patch together, some of the blanks and missing pieces from the end of Star Wars Legends and the beginning of Star Wars Evolved. So as we move into like 2005, you can see like there's quarters here, right? And in the first quarter, it was quiet because they had done the Dark Spirit of Darth Vader roleplay. Serious roleplay was being established, norms, groups, training, and you got to think about the movies too. Like some of the old fans from the classic Star Wars, they had that Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader story, and there wasn't as much content out as what there is now. So there's a lot of flexibility, but some of the role players, role plays being small, that was perfectly timed. But as the Phantom Menace comes out and Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith in the early 2000s, like this is as things are being built in the prime of Star Wars, this is a lot of core where you have not just old school fans, but you have kids and youth at the time in the early 2000s logging on. And I know like 2005, it may still have been more of a builder and social advertising because I didn't hear about it till 2006. But if you look, there are some big things that happen. Like Dark Lords of the Sith group is founded by Darth Vader, so Korriban opens. It doesn't look, I would say, like the Korriban you would expect at the time, but he did the best with what he had at the time. And Darth Vader left a imprint on Star Wars roleplay history. You have the Grand Army of the Republic, which is founded by Yuri and Kukla, and then lightsaber construction kits are developed. So you have these as well as HUDs and stuff that are starting to become available. And then the third quarter, Jedi Honor Group is founded by Obanna Kerr, who has relationships with a lot of the Jedi groups at the time. So with Marcus and Nikhil and a lot of them, the Jedi Alliance is found. Even though there are some questionable things about the early history, I mean, Jedi did try to come together as one entity, even if it was through an alliance, because there were so many groups and people that were trying to start a roleplay. So if we look at New Hostess, that's kind of the first Jedi base that's not sandbox, like it's just reserved for roleplay use. And I know Marcus has, I think, some sort of attachment here. Like if I were to click here, let's see where it takes me. No, just the Grand Army. I thought there was another link, but I believe he had a website at one point. Maybe if I click this. Yeah, this is a little later. Some more forums on a lot of Star Wars Galaxies people. They're like that want deep story are coming on. Marcus, though, he claims that he's not a former Star Wars Galaxies roleplay. So he's, currently in Sirius, which I've heard about. Those are some of the early Jedi sims, and a lot of the serious Jedi players were there in the beginning. So there was a big pull. Like, people weren't just in for the hack and slash, but they wanted something a little extra. Then they moved on to Second Life, and there was a lot of sims, a lot of group, a lot of people that were conversing at this time. And not just here, but I know Marcus had a website. He details some of the active groups. So even though things seemed mostly sandbox and a little wild in the start, they did develop how roleplay should be done. Um, if you look on to Tatooine, Mindbender Vox, then another Jedi Master group by a former Darth, Mandalorian armor, so all the clans are growing, 2006. So, there was a story from 2005 about one of the earliest note cards that had been passed around, and it was found in my later years. Like, I didn't know much about it, but obviously I've heard some of the early Jedi names, and um, it's a role play. It's done by Nakia Rutherford, probably one of the oldest, like, actual recorded. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's the second major event that kicked off a year after the Darth Vader thing, which this is where I got the inspiration for episode 3, the Fifth Jedi Schism. Continuing line with Star Wars lore, you have Nikhil Rutherford and his former Padawan, Uruski Khan, and the two of them essentially turn to the dark side. It's almost like one of those Revan and Malik kind of tales where two headstrong Jedi Knights or Jedi Masters, in this case, head out and they corrupt one another. First in this instance, Uruski Khan, he's tempted by the Sith and he joins the dark side, and he's the first one, and he infiltrates his former order and corrupts another master, and then once he's strong enough, he goes after the master that trained him as a Jedi, Nakia Rutherford. And I'm just going based on, the note card that I read, that it does confirm that he turned to the dark side and, did try to fight the Jedi, Marcus being one of them. And Marcus' side of the story is, from what I've read and, what available content is online, he's seen Nikhil as an impatient Jedi Master, even as they tried to work together to unite the Jedi. So you have Nikhil's fall to the dark side, and originally I had wanted to write Nikhil potentially as the main character, but as I thought about it, like, I wanted to tell it from a different point of view, because there are some inspirations from real Star Wars stories, but there's also things that I want to be original about as I'm writing these books. So, episode 3 with the Jedi Schism, you get to, see how just like in previous eras where some of the Jedi turned dark, whether it was over the Mandalorian Wars or it was over just conflicting beliefs about how the Force should be taught, you see that early clash of some of these Jedi figures and, some original figures as well. So that kind of explains the first 3 books, where I got the inspiration of plot line, and then you dig into the first one. You can see there's some inspiration from other Star Wars games and films, but ultimately some of the characters, like I said, were original, and I wanted to tell more than just a quick little synopsis of history. I wanted to really bring a story and honor some friends in the process. I think the last thing I'm going to cover on this video is I'm just going to go through 2006 a little bit. The Jedi Alliance disbanded, New Holsters closed, nor the Jedi founded, the Jedi Unity founded, Dantooine Sim, Knights of the Old Republic. So there was a little bit of timeline jumping, and that's another thing that I work to correct in my books, because some of the timeline jumping has left some confusion, but to be able to smoothly connect from all the dots together, that was another inspiration as I move forward into writing some of the stories and using inspired characters. You have Duxon open, Herb's Nebula, which is, I think, inspired as a Bespin location. Roads closed, Naboo, the city of Theed open, which, you know what, you have the roleplay combat system, Dantooine combat system. Some of the early Force stuff is happening, and as I said, I joined in 2006, so I know that they marketed it as a game. And I first joined the Grand Army of the Republic, which at this time um, had leased owned land or a sim on Secondlife for a year, and had a group officially founded. But even before the founding of the group, I think there's some history, with some of the players going back as far as 2004, maybe even 2003. But they definitely built a lot of stuff, and Bikira was a big sim that I had joined, and I knew nothing about really Second Life or Star Wars roleplay. Like, I'd seen some of the other sims, like ancient Japan and cities, and even some other wild stuff that was just going around. There was anything and anything the imagination could, you know, think of. But as I continued on, I found a home in Star Wars because that's something that I was really interested in. So I learned the basics of roleplay, what it was, how to do it, and I never really made it anywhere far in the Grand Army of the Republic. I'm not a big name when it comes to that, but I was in the 2006 recruitment phase. I was a private. I was, an infantry soldier under Corey Tooney's squadron of clone troopers. I spent at least a couple. I want to say a couple months, but maybe we're looking at more like a month. As I just, as a newbie, learned the ropes. They taught me my way, and then I moved on to the new Naboo sim that had opened, and the city of Theed was a popular spot. I remember getting in with the Shadow Jedi Order. It was Ghost Longstaff and Jericho Yost. I was recruited by Felicia Longstaff, Ghost's sister, where I did my, I felt like I only spent a couple days as Padawan before I was bumped up to a Jedi Knight. Because if you look, like, all these sims are opening and shutting, groups are coming up, like there's a mass influx of players. And even if we move to the fourth quarter, like it's very condensed. And I was a Jedi Master within a couple months. Like, it wasn't, I didn't really get a deep training. It was more like the Jedi Code and Jedi etiquettes, but I didn't do no serious Padawan training like what you would have done even a couple of years ago in roleplay. And as a knight, I think my highlight was I rescued the Princess of Naboo, which then gave me a promotion to Jedi Master in the Shadow Jedi Order. And then, BIS opens, so we were starting to fight against them, but some of our members were corrupted by the dark side, so my master had actually ended up going over to BIS, and eventually I think she gave it up. Telos was a big thing too. A lot of people were moving over to Telos. They really liked that sim. Like, it opened, and I think it was open for maybe a year or two. Like I said, Coruscant was an on and off location. The old Republic roleplay died out. Like, people were wanting to jump to the Star Wars Legends timeline, or a little bit after. You had, all the main pioneers. They had come together A lot of players joined in 2006. A lot of people made a name for themselves by being on there for 3 years at the time. So I always say that's the golden era of roleplay, but I think really it's within a couple years of that because that's when things get serious. But I enjoyed my first go. I got to do a couple missions as a clone trooper. I got to save the princess. Have some firefights because at the time it was very metered combat. Um, and after I moved on from a clone, I briefly played a Grey Jedi, where within a couple months, I had jumped in each I guess lens of the Jedi role. I wouldn't say it was heavy role play. It was light to mediocre. I did have some fights and some battles. Like I learned the combat through that, but when I later joined the Jedi Praxium after, then I had to start over because they were serious players and they were dealing out some serious role play at the time. So I had to I had to really redo it from the start. And I mean, the last people that were in my Naboo group, that's where they ended their role player career. They guided me to Coruscant, left me in the hands of them. I mean, a lot of Naboo players, they had moved over to Coruscant after the role plays started to kind of die down. We Yeah, look, Force roleplay combat system. Little Moss S. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I just want to confirm before saying it, but the Tatooine sim at one time it was like 5 sims deep. Today it's only one, but the LME that's still here. Um, yeah, look, Jedi Praxium founded in 2007, so that's kind of around the time we started to make the move. I didn't want to jump that far ahead, but I'm not going to go in depth to 2007 too deep right now, but 2006, if you look like, obviously, there's already a lot of characters within the first couple years, so by adding a lot of creative touch into episode 4, 5, 6, and 7, able to give my first character, more of a backstory and make it more serious, like redo, like what I should have done, how you pitch these stories together. I've definitely considered the fact that even from 2007 to 2003, that's what? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like 4 years. 4 years of role play condensed, and that's a number of years, but considering that the role play does slow down and stop at certain times, I think I still have a lot of room left to tell a story and to continue. There's not much time on my first recording left, so you're probably all sick of me yipping and yapping, but I did want to kind of talk about my inspiration and a little bit more on the timeline that's appeared on the lore site for Second Life, because like I said, I've drawn a lot of inspiration from these events. Maybe when I come back I will talk a bit more about more of the timeline, and I don't think I'm going to spend as long talking. I just want to explain some things about my books while I was going through the timeline. So thank you all for listening. May the force be with you. Have a good evening and have a good week.